Welcome to another episode of Preferred Walk On. I'm your host, Max Chadwick. We've got another top 10 positional ranking for you guys today. I already did my top 10 quarterbacks in college football, my top 10 running backs in college football, and my top 10 wide receivers in college football heading into next season. Now it's time for my top 10 tight ends in college football heading into 2023. Of course, as I always say before these videos, I have the list out at pff.com, which you can check out, of course. But those lists were published a couple months ago. And as I've had more time to watch more of these guys, go back and look at the tape more on these guys, my opinions have changed ever so slightly. So it's not exactly accurate to the list you'll find at pff.com. But of course, go check out that article if you want to. And of course, subscribe to this channel as well. Not only are we ranking every single position in college football, the top 10 players at that position, we also are interviewing a lot of the players that will be on these lists of the top 10 returning at their position. And you can see we've had a ton of really, really big interviews already and a lot more still to come as well. But let's start off with my number 10 tight end in the country, and that is Brant Kuithe from Utah, who wasn't originally on this list, but as I go back and watch tape from years prior, I had to put him here at the number 10 spot. He played only 4 games this past season before suffering a season-ending knee injury, but he's been one of the most productive tight ends in the country over the past few seasons. In 2019, he was a PFF third-team All-American. He had 832 yards after the catch since 2019, which are 5th most among all tight ends in college football. And maybe the most impressive part about Kuithe is that his teammate, Dalton Kincaid, who of course was the first-round pick of the Buffalo Bills in the 2023 draft, his teammate was actually the backup to him. So it was Kuithe, not Cade, that was a top tight end for Utah, both in 2020 and 2021. Now, the big question for him, of course, is how he's going to recover from that knee injury. But if he does, he should reestablish himself as one of the best returning tight ends in college football. So at number 10 is Brant Kuithe from Utah. At number 9 is Caden Prieskorn from Ole Miss, who is transferring to Ole Miss from Memphis. He was actually a John Mackey Award semifinalist. John Mackey Award, of course, given to the best tight end in college football. And Prieskorn, as a redshirt junior, was 4th among all tight ends in the country with 340 yards after the catch this past season. And among those tight ends with at least 50 targets, his 133.7 passer rating when targeted trailed only Brock Bowers. So when you look at that, you know, Brock Bowers, who we'll be talking about much later on this list, that's some pretty elite company for Caden Prieskorn. And, you know, he's going to test his talents next year, going from the American Athletic Conference to the SEC, like I mentioned now, at Ole Miss. So at number 9, Caden Prieskorn. At number 8 is Arizona State tight end Jalin Conyers, who is an absolute monster after the catch. He forced 21 missed tackles after the catch, which led all tight ends in the country and ranked 4th among FBS tight ends in receiving yards after contact with 170 receiving yards after contact. So I'm a big fan of the new Sun Devils head coach in Kenny Dillingham. I am really excited to see what he does incorporating Jalin Conyers into his offense next year. I think it should be a lot of fun. Jalin Conyers is amazing after the catch. So he comes in at number 8. At number 7 is Ohio State tight end Cade Stover, who is a terrific run blocker. He had 5 big-time blocks this past season, which, if you don't know, big-time blocks are PFF's highest graded blocks. So 5 big-time blocks for Cade Stover, which was tied for 4th among Power 5 tight ends this past season. Now, as a receiver, you look at the stats, nothing too special, but you got to keep in mind he's playing with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, who, if you watch my top 10 receivers list, I consider to be the 2 best receivers in college football. So when you're playing with the 2 best receivers in college football, it's going to be pretty hard for you to make your mark as a receiver. But he's still impressed on his limited opportunities as a pass catcher. He had 110 receiving yards after contact, which were 11th among Power 5 tight ends. So, you know, I'm excited to see him maybe progress more as a receiver this year, but he's still a terrific run blocker, and I think Cade Stover is still one of the top 10 tight ends in the country. At number 6 is Stanford tight end Benjamin Yurosek, who had a relatively disappointing season this past year after breaking out in 2021. He only had a 65.3 receiving grade in 2022, which was nearly 15 points lower than what he posted in 2021. He had 200 fewer receiving yards despite having 4 more targets. Still, though, when you combine what he did in 2021 and 2022, he had 1,099 receiving yards, 596 yards after the catch over those last 2 seasons, which trails only Brock Bowers among returning Power 5 tight ends. Now, he doesn't really add anything as a run blocker, but he deserves a spot on this list for his receiving production over the last couple years. So I want to see a bounce back year from Yurosek, but what he did in 2021 was special enough for me to have him on this list here. At number 5, now the top 5 tight ends in college football. At number 5 is Bryson Nesbit from North Carolina, who's way more of a downfield threat, I think, than most tight ends. He averaged 11.8 yards was his average depth of target, which was 6th among Power 5 tight ends, and that kind of helped him in averaging the 5th most yards per route run among tight ends at 2.21. And he was the only tight end in the top 15 of yards per route run with a double-digit average depth of target, too. So this guy was a downfield receiver and still really produced as a downfield receiver at tight end as well. So I'm excited for him. I think this is a big breakout year coming for Bryson Nesbit because you think about the UNC team. Obviously, Drake May, my number 2 returning quarterback in college football, going to be one of the first picks of the 2024 NFL Draft. Check out my way too early 2024 mock if you haven't already. But, Drake May is going to be throwing the ball a ton next year, obviously, when you have a quarterback of that caliber. But you lose Josh Downs to the NFL. You lose Antoine Green to the NFL, your 2 best receivers. Bryson Nesbit all of a sudden looks like the top target right now for Drake May in that UNC offense. So I think, he really could have a huge year next year, Bryson Nesbit, for sure. At number 4, another guy who kind of had a down year, but I'm not really blaming him too much for that down year. And it's Jaheim Bell, who is now at Florida State, transfers there from South Carolina. Bell was really criminally underutilized by South Carolina this past season. He only had 28 targets. 28 targets. That was it, which was 91st among all tight ends in the country. He even, South Carolina was so down bad, honestly, on that offense last year at times that he played running back for them. And he had 257 rushing yards, which, of course, led all tight ends in the country. The reason why he's number 4 on this list is for what he did in 2021. As a sophomore, he led all tight ends with 3.67 yards per route run, and his 354 yards after the catch trailed only Brock Bowers among Power 5 tight ends. And even that year, he still wasn't getting fed a lot of targets. He only had 41 targets that year, which were 42nd at the position. So even on, limited opportunities, Jaheim Bell was really producing for South Carolina. And I think in that Florida State offense, playing with Jordan Travis, who we actually interviewed on the show. Go check out the interview if you haven't already. But playing in that Florida State offense where there's so many weapons, Jaheim Bell could really explode next year. I'm really excited to see what he can do in that Seminole offense. So at number 4 is Jaheim Bell. At number 3 is a guy who actually went in the first round of my way too early 2024 mock, and I would say he's the favorite to be tight end 2 in next year's draft. But I want to remind you guys, I'm not ranking them based off NFL projection. I'm ranking them based off how good they are in college football. And at number 3 is Ja'Tavion Sanders from Texas. He came to Austin with a lot of hype. He was a top 15 recruit in the 2021 class. Really began to live up to that billing as a sophomore. He had 32 combined first downs and touchdown receptions, which trailed only Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, and Brock Bowers among FBS tight ends. So among all tight ends in the country, Dalton Kincaid, first-round pick. Michael Mayer, early second-round pick. I would have taken that guy top 20, but early second-round pick. And Brock Bowers, who we'll get into in a minute. Those are the only guys who had more combined receiving first downs and touchdowns than Ja'Tavion Sanders this past year. He had 613 receiving yards. That trails only Bowers among returning Power 5 tight ends. He's a freak, 6'4", 242 pounds. Like I said, looks like the early favorite to be tight end 2 in next year's draft behind Brock Bowers. So I'm a big fan of Jatavion Sanders' game. At number 2, though, I have Brevyn Spann-Ford from Minnesota, who's arguably the most well-rounded tight end in college football. You know, you look at Darnell Washington at Georgia, who was this massive tight end at like 270 pounds, basically an extra offensive tackle for Georgia last year. Think of that when you watch Brevyn Spann-Ford, because he really is like that. He was a redshirt senior. He had an 82.5 run blocking grade in 2022, which was second among FBS tight ends. His 82.1 receiving grade was 8th. He averaged 2.22 yards per route run, which was 4th among all tight ends in the country. No matter what Minnesota asked of him, Brevyn Spann-Ford delivered. And that's why, you know, as an NFL prospect, is he better than maybe Jatavion Sanders or Jaheim Bell? No. But in terms of what you can do in that offense for Minnesota, I think he deserves to be here at this number 2 spot. At number 1, this is one of the easiest positions to find the number 1 player. In fact, if you see any top 10 tight end list or any ranking of college football tight ends, and this guy isn't at number 1, probably should throw away that list. Brock Bowers is the easy choice here at number 1 from Georgia. You know, like I said, there are some positions where you can debate who the best player is at that position. This is not one of them. He's been arguably the best tight end in college football in his first 2 seasons of college football. As a true freshman, Brock Bowers was both the highest graded Power 5 tight end and was the most valuable one in PFF's wins above average metric. He was once again the most valuable tight end this past season, and he led the position in receiving yards, yards after the catch, and receiving yards after contact. He's the reigning John Mackey Award winner, which is given to the best tight end in college football. Listen, Kyle Pitts was a top 5 pick, the 4th overall pick. We kind of said after he came out in that 2021 draft, man, we're never going to see another guy like Kyle Pitts. And listen, Brock Bowers is not like the tight end that Kyle Pitts is, but in terms of how good he is, there could be a conversation between Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts for not only the best tight ends we've seen in college football recently, but one of the best tight end prospects ever in the NFL draft. That's how special Brock Bowers is. So he is easily the number 1 tight end in college football heading into next season. But of course, let me know in the comments below if you disagree with my list at all. Hopefully you don't think anyone else but Brock Bowers is the best returning tight end, because I don't really think that's debatable. But let me know in the comments below. And of course, hit that subscribe button for more lists like this and more interviews with some of the biggest superstars in college football. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Chad_Maxwick, on TikTok as well. But yeah, that's what I got for you guys. So I'll see you next time.